All right, cool. So thanks everyone for joining. My name is Lauren. I'm from the Swimm team. On behalf of both Swimm and Spotify for Backstage, thank you so much for joining us. And a big thank you to Ryan McKenna, staff engineer at RVO Health, for agreeing to take part in the webinar with us today. So we're really excited to be able to show you all firsthand how engineering teams are benefiting from Swimm's integration with Spotify for Backstage. Documentation quality really is a key component in driving value and adoption in your Backstage deployment. So we're super thankful for Ryan for joining us to share his experience as one of our champions. So before we get started, just wanted to give you a quick introduction to the panelists. So first off, we have my colleague Tom Machidror, one of the co-founders of Swimm. Joining Tom is Andre Wanlin, a solution engineer at Spotify for Backstage. And of course, Ryan, staff engineer at RVO Health, known for their work with Healthline and Optum. So we'll do some quick intros on the companies everyone works for, and then we'll get into the panel. So Tom, do you mind speaking about Swimm for a few minutes?
Sure. Thank you, Lauren. Thanks, Andre, Ryan, for joining. So I'm Tom. I'm one of the co-founders of Swimm, Chief Business Officer. Well, our job at Swimm is to help software engineering organizations understand their own code. So we're a code knowledge assistant. And there are two main things that we do. Given code base, and particularly if it's old and convoluted, some people might call it legacy code. A lot of folks don't really know what's going on there. They want to make changes. They're afraid to break anything. Maybe they want to modernize it. We help engineering teams, and particularly the ones getting into the code for the first time, understand how the code works. The second thing that we do is we're also a documentation platform where we automate all of the annoying and time-consuming elements of the documentation process. So we generate documents automatically, even if there's no documentation around, just like someone would have written them over time. So we help you to get started with an overview of everything you need to know to understand what the code base does and how it works. Then we can also help by generating documentation as you're making changes to your code, particularly from pull requests, brand changes, and so on. Then, and this might be the most important part, we also make sure that the documentation remains up to date as the code changes. That's important because if that wasn't the case, then it's just like all the documentation that you have elsewhere that might have been great when it was written, but now it's no longer up to date, and you don't even know what's up to date and what isn't. Lastly, we help to find the documentation when you need it, either with a chat interface, but most importantly, you can find it on Backstage. So that's all for me, and I'll get to more details later.
Cool, thanks, Tom. Andre, a quick intro, please.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Andre from Spotify for Backstage. Want to take a step back and talk about Backstage itself. So Backstage is a framework for building an internal developer portal that is basically a central site for all your tooling. So engineers can start from Backstage and fan out to all the things that you have within your organization's ecosystem. Includes a service catalog, software templating, and TechDocs is where we're going to talk a lot about today. And this is the documentation feature of Backstage. Where Spotify for Backstage comes in is we provide enterprise support above and beyond Backstage, as well as a suite of plugins to help level up and add additional functionality to Backstage for things like scorecarding, role-based access control, insights into your adoption, and some cultural features like running hackathons. So that's a little bit about Spotify for Backstage.
Cool, thank you so much. And Ryan, do you mind telling us a bit more about the engineering organization at RVO Health?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. So my name is Ryan McKenna, and I'm a staff engineer for RVO Health. And we're a pretty big company at this point. We're probably the largest health company that you've not necessarily heard of. We're a portfolio of brands, so we think of like Healthline.com, Real Appeal, Psych Central, Medical News Today. We span a pretty broad sweep of stuff. And we also work with Optum Store and some other properties. So we're at the size and scale where documentation management and code quality is really important to us. And also, it's quite difficult to manage across different brands when you consider a large portfolio company as ourselves. So there's a lot for us to talk about here.
Definitely. Cool. So thanks for those intros. Let's get started. And just a heads up, we'll be doing a Q&A after, so please feel free to send any questions in the Q&A feature on the bottom. Cool, Tom, thank you.
All right, thanks, Lauren. Okay. First off, I'd like to start at the beginning. And Ryan, before Swimm, before Backstage at RVO, what was documentation like? What was knowledge management, trying to get around the code, understanding it? What was that like? And what were like the triggers to go out and find solutions?
Yeah, so the story kind of starts like 5-6 years ago with this. I mean, we've been using Backstage for a while and Swimm for a good minute here too. But before then, we did this all internally. At the time, companies of our size, that was what we were used to doing. We still maintain internal data and we still maintain a lot of internal processes, but we kind of had our own role of developer tooling. We had our own internal portal, and we actually had to build our own docs platform, always keep it up to date because we run into the normal challenges of when no one wants to keep it up to date. How do you surface this to the right shareholders and the right consumers? Like there's a ton of problems with that we were solving all entirely on our own.
Got it. And what did you feel like that's having an effect on developer experience, on velocity?
Yeah, I mean, the list of effects that has is numerous. We have developer experience as a big part of it, onboarding new people and then not being able to tell them like where to even find docs that are relevant. That's huge. The experience of a big part of it is actually like, how do we train people to use internally some of the tools that we've built? So even when you build your own internal docs platform, you still have to teach everyone at your company how to then use it. It doesn't just happen automatically. And so it becomes like more systems that you maintain. And there's definitely a cost to that, not just like cognitive load on the development experience, but developer experience and velocity all are definitely impacted.
Got it. If you had to say what eventually led you to pick to work with Backstage specifically, what do you think that was?
Well, for us, we're not above admitting that maybe this isn't our specialty. Right? We're a health company. We're great at delivering products to consumers to help them with their health, help them find doctors, navigate Medicare. Maybe we should stand on some of the shoulders of giants out here and see what other companies are doing and have solved in this space. And that's kind of what really led us to Backstage. I mean, we have a lot of the things that we need to solve for this, like software catalogs and plugins so that we can extend things. Like those are all requirements for us that we had already solved for. And having Backstage come out of the box with a lot of these things was hugely important for us, and it really increased velocity, which we were able to iterate on our developer platform.
To that point, if folks in the audience here are thinking about build or buy, what would be indicators from your experience that buy is they should go with buy?
Well, it's definitely something I think of maintenance. Everyone wants to build the cool thing, right? But if you don't have a team of engineers internally that not only wants to build it the first time, but wants to keep this running for years to come and is excited by that problem, is really engaged in it, and it is cost effective for that to be something that your company maintains, it's worth considering.
And sometimes like the folks that built one of these internal tools is no longer around, right? And now who knows how this thing works, how to maintain it.
And that's like the difference, right? You have to kind of maintain this as a product. And when you start taking it as seriously as that, I think sometimes companies, especially large engineering companies, they have this moment of, well, we can build this in-house, but if we're honest, we're not going to treat this as a product. It's not going to be something we're going to give the resources to, the ongoing maintenance to, the sheer level of just attention of, I'm going to research the best ways for this to work. I think that a lot of times internal tools are neglected when it comes to like the UX and the experience of how they're even working. And so if you're not going to treat it like a product and really give it that kind of ownership and the responsibility for that, it doesn't really work as well.
Yeah, So if you screw up something with your actual product, people from business are going to come shouting, right? But
Yep.
if you screw up something for developers, it's like, yeah, we're all on the same team. You know, it's hard. We don't have time. We have all these clients we need to take care of, right? All right.
Yeah, and it's definitely tricky. I think it's very important to treat developers just like you treat the consumers you're serving in a certain way. You know, the more you treat your own employees like they should have the best products to work with, also, the better everyone tends to do.
All right. So a while afterwards, you also chose to work with Swimm. What were the specific reasons why you chose Swimm specifically?
Well, so Swimm specifically came out of something that we discovered while we were building our own internal tools years ago with this, where we knew we wanted engineers to write documentation, and we just really struggled to get them to do that unless it was with their code. So Swimm was a really natural pairing for this problem that we had already identified, but weren't exactly sure how to navigate. In a lot of spots, we had built something similar to Swimm where we had it in the code and it was deployed to static sites. Like we kind of had some of this pipeline existing in some capacity, but Swimm just really supercharged our ability to do this. And the ability to share context across applications and reference code specifically was something that we've been really needing for a long time.
So one of the things that I would say the basis for the collaboration that Swimm and Backstage have is the fact that we both are proponents and heavy users of Docs as code. And it sounds from what you described that Docs as code was important for you. A lot of times there's like debate between Docs as code and other alternatives that are disconnected. Was there a debate on your side, or was there a consensus?
I mean, I think that there's always a debate, but slightly. I mean, I think it hinges around something slightly different in our mind a little. It's more about business logic and should it exist in code documentation or not, and then how do you keep it up to date? That's always been our crux. At the end of the day, you know, a lot of code is informed by business logic, and so you can't always keep it just, you know, the documentation just can't be there all the time. So yeah, I'd say we still go back and forth on this every once in a while.
All right. Andre, I want to move on to you. So we know why we picked Docs as code, you know, with wanting to keep documentation constantly up to date. That was a given that we would need to do it. I wondered, why was this a choice for Backstage specifically? How does that work into the way that you work?
Really, it was a cultural thing at Spotify. You know, writing code or writing your docs as code, writing it as part of your code base directly there where you're doing things, just culturally made sense. That's how we were doing things. And we already had the foundation of Backstage and a place to share it. So just that was a natural evolution. And then kind of going out of Spotify and looking at the customers that we work with, we also see that where having that code along with the documentation along with the code made it easier for developers to contribute more documentation and kind of grow that. I think naturally as people, the less friction there is to do something, the more likely you are to do it. And I think that really is what you see with the data around Docs as code. It's there as part of my pull request. This is easy. I'm going to write some Markdown. Markdown is nice and straightforward. It's not a super complicated syntax. It looks good and cool. This also gets shipped out to Backstage and TechDocs, and that's a win for me. It all kind of happens in my like normal sort of flow process as an engineer or developer.
That's cool. So I think not everyone knows that Backstage started off within Spotify, and it sounds like this wasn't a product choice. That this was something that organically grew from what developers wanted. Are there any other things that came up that way, and you know that you can pinpoint and say this is because of Spotify more than it is, you know, thought about Backstage as a tool?
Nothing is coming to me off the top of my head. I'll admit I'm relatively new to Spotify myself, though I've been part of the Backstage project for a number of years.
No worries. So Ryan, back to you. Can you talk a bit about the adoption of Backstage? How, you know, how that happened? What were some of the challenges that you had throughout?
Yeah, so I mean, we end up having a centralized team really lead the adoption of Backstage for us. We found that some of the things that we had learned from managing this problem ourselves were still valuable lessons. It is still good to have a team that is centrally responsible for making sure these things happen. If we just say to everybody, all right, suddenly you're all equally responsible for writing this thing and making it happen, it can be challenging to make sure it actually gets done. So we do have a team that's essentially set up Backstage, configured all the plugins, configured the software catalog, made sure the pipelines for documentation work. We do have a team of people dedicated to making that happen, and that greatly improves our ability to adopt Backstage at scale for us. That includes when we even have like GitHub bots that, you know, if you create a new repository in an organization, it says, hey, like, here's a PR for like adding it to Backstage. Like, here it is right now. And let's make sure this all stays up to date. And I found that's incredibly helpful for us.
So there's the team that manages Backstage, and what does access look like? Is it only developers? Is it other people? Any roles in particular that are important from that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, every engineer within the organization is empowered to go look and contribute to this code. So it's not like there's no closed source. There's no closed box here for anyone. If anyone wants to contribute a plugin or wants to help with the Backstage integration, like, everyone's welcome to do so. It's more from like we need to make sure this is working. Who do we call if something's not working? And who's the domain experts on this? And there is a set of people who, are in that position for us. As far as like everyone contributing to this, this is very much everyone's all about it all the time, especially when it comes to this pipeline of Swimm to Backstage, like everyone's writing docs and the pipeline is set up on purpose for this.
Anyone that's not a developer that is on Backstage? If not, have you thought about it?
Yeah, so Backstage isn't exclusive to developers in our company. The code parts of it are, not everyone's in GitHub, right? But getting into Backstage is not exclusive to that. I know product people work in there as well, and I know some of our business leads do it. I think the software catalog is one of the most important features for our business leaders. So everyone uses it. I think the part that is more developer specific is like the Swimm docs being in GitHub is more developer centric. But part of why we pipe them into Backstage is so that they are surfaced to everybody else.
Got it. So let's go back to Swimm for a sec. Let's talk about adoption of Swimm. What was that like? How fast did it go? Any hurdles there?
Well, I mean, it went pretty quick. I think if we look back at the last year or so with this, we started with one team, and that's usually how we do things in our organization. As a staff engineer, we're empowered to kind of identify problems and try to solve them in ways that we can roll out to a broader organization. We don't tend to do things as a whole organization at once because we're across the whole portfolio. That can be pretty disruptive. So we started with one team just to like kind of vet the idea out, and the team absolutely loved it. And we kind of have been slowly rolling new teams on ever since. And at this point, we actually have, I think, almost the vast majority of our developers are in Swimm versus I think there's only a few who aren't. And that it happened pretty quickly.
So one of the things that I saw at RVO, and you're included in this, is this tier of engineers that are not necessarily in a management position, but are like distinguished engineers. And can you talk a bit about that, and also talk about how that works with adoption processes of Swimm specifically and tools in general?
Yeah, so I think it's becoming more common in engineering companies of our scale and size, but the staff plus is like the role that people use as the term for it, where they're individual contributors, but they're not quite individual contributors in the traditional sense. A lot of what their role is, I think there's several books about this, and I think some people might even debate me on what staff plus even means. But it's more about knowledge sharing and transferring, and then planning. Making sure it's almost like architecture and organizational planning far beyond just the individual contributor role. It's not just I'm building this thing for the next 3 months. It's I'm building this thing for the next 3 months, and I have to teach a team of people how to use it. So that part of transferring that information to everyone is incredibly important. So we've seen a lot of adoption in that staff plus role for tools like this because it's just made the dissemination of this knowledge so much easier.
So you're saying specifically tools that relate to knowledge, people like that would be core to any adoption process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the people who have knowledge to transfer. I mean, one of the ways that we adopt people into Swimm is we say, okay, we're doing a new project on this, and an associate or a new junior engineer might join a project and have a bunch of questions that on something that isn't super well documented. And we would have them basically interview the more senior person on this project and create Swimm documentation as a result of that, as a way to more organically create opportunities for this knowledge to be transferred, which otherwise might just be neglected to do. So.
Very cool. So who, I asked you about access to Backstage, so on. How does that work with Swimm, and who updates the documentation?
Well, so we have a configuration, like we have a config that's set to say, oh, like this is your repository, it links to this one in Backstage, and then you have a line of config that says, all right, like, yeah, we're uploading docs to Swimm, pointed here and there, and it's all automated after that. So mine is mostly just at a repo level. You configure it with Backstage and the Swimm integration, and then once you're writing docs, it just kind of keeps everything up to date, and Backstage just responds.
All right. Andre, getting back to you, let's dive more into Backstage. Can you share, on top of the stuff that Ryan mentioned, more tips on effective adoption of the platform?
One of the biggest things I recommend to people are to look at it more from what are your problems that you currently have at your organization. I think it's really important to kind of take that framing, because Backstage is cool. It maybe is the shiny thing. Ryan alluded to like how developers like to build new things, but you want to make sure that you actually have a problem to solve, and that's where we see the most success. Oh, we have lots of repositories and we don't know who owns things. The software catalog can help solve that type of problem. Or we have technical documentation in many places, or we want to build up our technical documentation. TechDocs and the catalog will help drive you towards that. We want to standardize what our repositories look like. We want a standard way to build new things. The scaffolder and software templates can help with that. So again, try and think about what problems you have in your organization, and then see where Backstage potentially could help fill in those things. And then getting into TechDocs, I always like to say, start simple. It's an easy way to get going by, say, bringing in just READMEs. So you've got your catalog, bring in your READMEs. There's already usually a good amount of wealth and value in those, and make those more visible. Like great wins of having that in Backstage is, I'm an SRE, some services going down, maybe I don't recognize it. I can go into Backstage, I can quickly find the docs for that component, and I can quickly get a sense of like what's going on about it. And then from there, examples also terribly powerful. So have a repo with a bunch of cool markdown examples. Maybe use Mermaid for diagramming, have some examples for that, have some examples of like admonitions and like different things that you could do in TechDocs to kind of showcase what the capabilities are, because that goes well. So I guess documentation for documentation, so to speak.
Awesome. Happy you gave a shout out to Mermaid. We also love Mermaid and can keep it up to date. Mermaid diagrams, if anyone doesn't know it, look it up. So going back to you for a second, then I'll ask you to Andre. Ryan, what tips can you give folks on how to build a culture of documentation?
Yeah, so the culture of documentation largely comes from a space. When I think of the tips that, let's make more people to write documentation. Let's make it exciting to write documentation. I think the most important thing is what Andre actually had alluded to earlier, is reducing friction. Make it easier for people to contribute to this is by far and most the greatest velocity accelerator that you'll have. Like, the reducing friction here is the most important part. That's why keeping it close to code is really important. And then also just making it part of, if you're doing smaller branches, smaller PRs, et cetera, just make it more iterative. It's much easier to take small bites of a large problem over time than it is to try and do it all at once. So those are the biggest parts, really, to me. It's like, make it easy and make it something that is measurable to a degree. How many PRs are you putting in? Like, are you using PR templates? Like there's lots of tips and helpful ways to just make documentation writing better, and be your own friend in that.
Andre, any tips from your side in that?
Yeah. So leading by example can kind of be the snowball. So I've in my previous roles, I've written a lot of documentation and shared that with other engineers needing to do things. And so by seeing that, quality documentation, leading by example, I found that that would snowball. You get a few people are like get a lot of value out of the things that you've written, and then they start kind of like doing the same, and you sort of started to see that's like become a snowball, and you get this consistent effort there. And that all ties into what Ryan said, making it easy. That snowball and one of the best things that I've experienced as a way to move forward.
Ryan, I saw you nodding.
Yeah.
Did you get to write documents at the beginning?
Oh yeah, I mean, like when we talk about the leading by example thing, I mean, you couldn't be more accurate with that. When we did our first pilot with Swimm, it was the team that I was on was doing the pilot, and I think I wrote all of the initial. It was like you have to kind of feed the, you have to give it something to start with this momentum. You have to have docs before you can have more docs. It's almost like this chicken and egg scenario. It's like having more documentation creates better and more documentation because now you actually have it. I think I've seen a lot of teams struggle with this exact moment where they say, well, we don't have anything documented. And that blank page problem is actually like the hardest part for them to get over. And as soon as they have something documented that they care about, suddenly a bunch of good documentation will come out as a result.
Awesome. Yeah, you guys started before Gen AI. Now we have a way to generate a lot of that docs for you. So maybe we would have been able to save you some work, but I think it's a good thing that you got to write a lot of docs anyway. Okay, Ryan, what do you think has been the biggest impact of combining Swimm and Backstage together?
Yeah, so the big one for us really is getting documentation that engineers have written in front of non-engineers. That's always been a pipeline that's been tough for us because we want to keep writing documentation close to code. So we've had to roll our own solutions for that many times before, but Backstage now solves that problem for us. So I know the documentation that I'm writing for my engineers is also surfaceable up to business and product leaders. And that has a huge impact. Whereas before we would have this fragmented environment of like, we have business documentation here, but code documentation somewhere else, maybe in Confluence or in some other tools that are managing this. And there's just not a way to find it all. So discoverability, especially amongst those who are not just engineers, has been very, very important and impacted a lot here.
All right. Thank you both. We'll get to the Q&A section now. And so folks, if you haven't written your questions in the Q&A, please do it now. I think we can start with the first question, which is around, so I'll just read it. Can you point to case studies or other shares that bring home economics of treating your developers well by giving them quality of life tools for work, such as Swimm and Backstage? I consistently see initiatives around documentation, technical documentation, being swept under the rug. So I have some thoughts about that, but Ryan, I think you have some insights.
I do, yeah. So a big part of why we ended up actually discovering this problem as a company internally is that we started taking developer experience internally really seriously. About like 3 or 4 years ago, I actually wrote like an internal, like, how do we measure developer experience almost anonymously, and like how do we make sure people are happy, and like are they writing what they want to be working on, and all of these things. And so we as a company actually worked with GetDX. So getdx.com is like the thing for it. And so I don't have any like case studies to share with you presently, but it's all that place has everything. And when we started measuring our developer experience over time, it came up consistently. And we still do this every quarterly right now, where we measure these scores. Like, how's our documentation doing? Do people feel like it's useful? Is this a problem that we're solving accurately? And it just kind of helped us make really aware that documentation was a really big problem. And then as a result of that, we started exploring solutions like Swimm and Backstage. And so like there's certainly once you start measuring how the DX is going, you'll start to make improvements to it.
All right.
Immediately, they have a plugin.
Yes,
for
Andrew.
Backstage.
Sorry, can you repeat that, Andrew?
DX has a plugin for Backstage, which is quite good.
Oh, excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, I would probably point you towards backstage.spotify.com, the blog there. We have a few case studies on these types of things. So those would be good reads, maybe not specifically one I can think of off the top of my head that's documentation focused, but developer experience for sure. And then Backstage.io blog also has some case studies there that will be beneficial to look over as well.
So our website also has relevant information, and I'll add, I loved that Andre started with talking about the organization's problems first, right? Because both Swimm and Backstage are in the end tools, and the tools are there to solve big problems. What Ryan described is that they saw that developer experience wasn't as good as it should be. That is also tightly linked with business outcomes, right? But apart from that, when we talk with our clients, usually we ask, okay, what's top priority right now? What is top priority for the business and therefore becomes top priority for engineering? Do you have a handover of a big project? Do you have a new integration that needs to come out for a strategic client? Is there like a bottleneck in development because some people left and this is hurting your timeline for an important feature? When you start there and you find in these top priority projects that the management and transferring of knowledge is a significant element leading to either success or failure or delays, that is a very good way to explain to leadership why this needs to be handled. Because you can say we're going to spend a lot of time on this anyway, but it's going to be in the wrong way. It's going to be when we're stuck trying to fix issues because people didn't know what they were supposed to do exactly, or because people are going through very, very long code reviews because people didn't have the relevant context when they were making changes to the code and so on. So that would be another point that I would make. Have a question here for Ryan. If you haven't like an approximate adoption rate of Backstage specifically in your org.
Yeah, well, every engineer uses it. So that's it's the backbone of our engineering organization to a degree. I mean, it surfaces all that information for us. So just about everybody is using it at least in some capacity. I can't necessarily speak to outside the engineering org. I know that there are people using it, but I don't have a number for that.
All right. And the second question here for you, Ryan, is that did you find that documentation, whether before and after using Swimm, had an impact on platform thinking, on platform adoption?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things with that. I mean, fortunately, we kind of had this as a conversation as an engineering org. We're like, okay, well, we need to decide as an organization what we're going to do about this problem, because we had, and results from our developer experience measurements and those kind of things. It kind of pushed us to make a decision. So when we talk about mass adoption of platform thinking in this sense, we kind of collectively decided and said, all right, well, we have to pick one, and we're not going to build a thing. So like, we'll use Backstage if this makes sense for us. And it may not be, every exact thing we want, but we can make this exactly what we will need it to be with some time and a little bit of effort. So that was kind of where we went for that. And then as far as documented related issues, it really was like that chicken and egg scenario. It's like once we started creating documentation here, it became obvious that this was the best way to create documentation, and it kind of kept getting better and better and better.
Cool. There are two questions here that are kind of related. I'm going to ask them both, and both relate to Swimm. The first is what we mean when we say documentation. That's an excellent question. And specifically, it's that it sounds like Swimm supports code documentation very well. And what about how-to guides, tutorials, runbooks, and so on? And the other question is, how does Swimm documentation that's being generated compare with Copilot type documents that are provided by Microsoft, AWS, OpenAI, and so on? So first of all, what type of documentation does Swimm excel at? What our focus is? Anything that should change, whether if the code changes. So obviously, if you're explaining the code itself, how it works, why it was created the way it was, like technical code documentation, then yes, I mean, obviously this is one of the things in the core of what we do. But if you're talking about tutorials, run books, how-to guides, and so on, these also often need to change when the code changes. Specifically, like some of the documentation that I'm assuming folks at RVO have on Backstage isn't only about understanding how a particular service works, but also how to work with the service, right? So this is like external facing documentation for someone that needs to use it. But then if something changes in the service that might impact or need to impact documentation that is external, and that external documentation could be someone using the service. It could be, if we're talking about runbooks, someone trying to figure out what's wrong with a bug in production and so on. So anything that connects with code and should change could be relevant. And to the question about generative AI solutions and so on, the answer is similar. The question is how tightly linked these are to the code, and if we're talking about the code, what's the level of explanation? Generative AI, like LLM specifically, are fantastic in writing code comments. So they can look at a particular code snippet and give an awesome comment. They can also go the other way around. But being able to look at an entire code base and understand a flow or class inheritance or describing a specific module or component, that's something that's very, very hard for them. And also creating documentation that explains that is even harder. And then ultimately keeping that up to date with code changes is something that these tools don't know how to do at all. So that's about that. Is it possible to see a quick demo of Swimm and Backstage integration? Not right now. Not right now, but that's a good idea to maybe send something over when we have like a video or something like that. And another question, because there's a parent-child relationship in Backstage between Backstage entity and docs, how does the Backstage Swimm integration account for this? Was this a problem for you, Ryan?
So I was not the engineer who built or worked on the Backstage Swimm integration. We do have it through our documentation as components. So we actually measure everything to as entities this way. So we have it in this relationship, but it hasn't been a real problem in the sense where like discoverability has been an issue. It was something we had to take into account when we structured our integration. But once it was set and forget.
All right. There's also a question here about templates and being able to have quality gates and relating to Swimm and Backstage specifically. So Swimm documents are regular Markdown documents. Any tests or processes that you run on other regular Markdown documents, you can run on Swimm documents as well. All right. Another request for a Swimm Backstage demo. Okay, so we'll take that seriously. Any other questions that we haven't answered yet? Let's see. Looks like we are done. All right.
Cool. So thank you, everyone.
Looks like one last question came in. Tom, what led you to create something like Swimm?
Oh, that's a great question. All right. So we actually started off Swimm several years ago when economy looked very different and all of the tech companies in the world were in a hiring spree, and onboarding was by far their biggest challenge. They just didn't know how to operate in a situation where half of the people in the organization were in the organization, for a few months. So everyone that knew how to do the work was busy onboarding new people, and all the new people didn't know how to do anything. That led us to take a look at this at first at the onboarding problem. Then we understood that the main part of onboarding, which is hard, is actually the code itself, right? You can get to understand, the stack and so on. Most experienced developers get a hang of everything pretty quickly. But then understanding the code of the organization is very hard because it is completely and utterly unique, and nothing can prepare you for it, no matter how experienced you are in some cases. that led us to understand that we need to help organizations understand their own code. And the reason, by the way, that we called it Swimm was because when we spoke with folks at really the beginning, before we even started, we asked them, how do you onboard new engineers? So some of them told us we just throw them in the deep end and they're either sink or swim. All right.
Great. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining. This session was recorded, so we'll send it to your way if you want to share with any colleagues. And really, this is the beginning of our partnership with the folks at Spotify for Backstage. So really stay tuned for everything. Thanks again, Ryan, for joining us. We really, really, really appreciate this. And have a good day, everyone.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Cheers,
Bye.
everyone. Have a great day.
Yeah.